You have a great relationship with your spouse until you marry her and discover that life together comes with problems and issues and complications and all this sort of stuff. And that your wheels don't always match. A lot of times they clash. And so what I want to say is that sadly we lose the beautiful fellowship that we had in the beginning because of conflict in our relationship. Sometimes we have to put the relationship on hold so we can have some good fellowship. You have to table some problems that you can't solve right away. My wife and I, we've had all kinds of conflicts over the 4 years. We'll be on the 16th of October, thank the Lord that we've been married. But we've got into all different kinds of conflicts and stuff. And it's funny to me how that none of those conflicts arose before we got married. Not even an indicator that those issues were even going to, come up at some point. It's amazing to me how that we could enjoy each other so much and spend hours on the phone with each other in the beginning just talking about everything and anything. One of the most influential, powerful conversations that we had one time was over the word nothing. Because I asked her when we first met, I said, well, what do you want to talk about? I don't got nothing. I said, no, you got everything, because we can talk about nothing forever. Nothing is a word that only exists in the vocabulary of God. It's sad that we as human beings thought that we could take it on. We could just go on and on about nothing. But then relationships set in and all of this seriousness and signing on the dotted line. And that's when the sweaty palms come in and the heart palpitations and all this other sort of stuff. Instead of making the transition from fellowship to faithfulness, we moved from fellowship to relationship. And then we started attacking each other because of our differences. I wonder if we've done the same thing with the Lord because we didn't really understand how He comes into our world and moves in our lives and has a friendship with us. Acts chapter 18 is what I want to speak out of briefly. I'm saying that by faith, briefly.
Oh, yes, amen.
And the church said amen. From relationship to fellowship. Now see, we look at that in our eyes as a downgrade. Because we're all trying to get off what the young people call today the friend zone. We don't want to be in the friend zone because in the friend zone we have to respect boundaries and we have different laws and we can only say certain things and do certain things and we can't be offensive to each other. But automatically once you become in a relationship, you can say whatever about each other and do whatever about each other and then discover that your fellowship has disappeared. Have we done that with the Lord? Have we forsaken fellowship with the Lord for relationship with the Lord? See, when did it become this big thing of it's not about, this and it's not about that. It's not about religion. This is what they started teaching. They said it's not about religion. It's about relationship. And they were partially correct from a human standpoint when we thought, okay, well, you got to have a relationship with Him. But let me tell you what relationship has brought on. Relationship has brought nothing but conflict and frustrations and trying to restore what was broken. That's what relationship purchases for you. So if you will trade relationship and consider fellowship an upgrade, then you will experience a greater quality of a love life with the ones that you love. And if that applies to human beings, then why wouldn't it apply to God? We're made in the likeness of God, created in His image. So why would we bicker back and forth with God and have issues over how He's this way and we're that way and all this sort of stuff and just saying, Lord, thanks for being my friend. You've been such a faithful friend all this time. I sure appreciate you being there for me. No, God, you allowed this to happen. And how could you let that happen? And how could you put that man there? And how could you put that woman there? And how could you let that happen and let them leave and let that happen to me? And then the more you bicker with God and the more deeper into your relationship with God what you get, the further away from fellowship with God you become. Acts chapter 18, it says, verse 1, after these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth. Athens to me represents a place of acrobatics. It's a place where everybody showed their ability to do all of these wonderful exploits. It's the land where that people came from, like Hercules, and they talk about all the Greek gods and the great warriors and all this sort of stuff, that the people who were in the Olympics and all this sort of stuff. Athens was the Olympic area of the world. Acrobats and Olympics. That's what you get in relationships. Acrobatics and Olympics. You become the best swimmer. You become the best javelin thrower. I mean, in a relationship, you learn all of this stuff. Don't shout me down when I'm preaching good. You know how to see your way out of arguments. You know what to say and what not to say. You know how to tiptoe through the tulips. I mean, you learn all that you need to learn the longer you stay in relationship. But sadly, you become an Olympic person who studies and trains and prepares for one moment. And then what do you do when Olympic season is over? You go back to the training, back to the rigorous. And the whole time you're doing it, guess what you're doing it with? By yourself. You're doing it alone. All of this preparing and self-preparation and preservation, you're doing it all by yourself. I know I'm not shouting and screaming and hollering and all this sort of stuff, but I know I'm coming right to you. Coming right to you. From Athens to Corinth. Well, who knows what's written in Corinthians? It is the chapter of, it's the love chapter. Not the acrobats and Olympics, but the love chapter, the enduring all things, the suffering all things. Love doth not vaunt itself. Who knows it? Someone tell me the love. Love is not unseen, does not behave itself unseemly. It is not self-seeking. Oh man, I know I'm hurting some people this morning. I'm hurting you, but that's all right. That's okay. It's good for you. It's the word. It's good for you. It's sharper than any two-edged sword. It cuts down to the dividing of soul and spirit. Sadly, we all stay in the soulish realm of things instead of in the spirit realm, and we allow relationship to keep us tied up in all of this soulishness when fellowship with God would keep us in the state of a spiritual life. Yeah. From Athens to Corinth, from acrobats to love. We can depart from there. And this is what Paul did. Paul departed from Athens and he went to Corinth. And he just found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy. As Paul is coming and leaving from the Olympic world to the love world, he encounters a Jew who is coming lately to Italy. This is a convergence of times where that one is moving from one place and the other one is moving from another. One is moving by requirement, the other one is moving by desire. I don't know how I got into all this, but I'm in it now, so I might as well just stay with it. St. Paul is moving because his desire is to go unto Corinth, but this other one is moving because someone else is putting pressures on them and demands upon them that is requiring of them to move out from their homeland, moving from their comfort zone, if you will. They're being forced by this Emperor Claudius out of their place of comfort in Rome. But the timing is perfect to meet Paul on his journey. This is how God works. God is all the time trying to move us from acrobatics to love. From trying to be this ultimate scriptural fulfiller to being somebody that just walks with him and talks with him and loves him and has compassion and exhibits God because you've been with God. Simple fellowship and communion with the Lord. One is moving from Rome, their home, because the Emperor Claudius is demanding it and driving away the Jews. So they come lately, meaning they weren't excited to leave. You're not going to be excited when God calls you from relationship to fellowship. Oh, you need to receive that this morning, because you're not going to be excited about it when God says, enough of the bickering, enough of the fighting, enough of the back and forth. I want you to love each other and enjoy each other. I want you to love me and enjoy me, and stop trying to think that you know what I know. That you can do what I can do, because you can't do what I can do, God says. My ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. As far as the heavens are above the earth, so are my thoughts above your thoughts, and my ways beyond your ways. Come into fellowship with me. Stop bickering over a relationship with me. Stop saying, I can't do this, and I'm not enough, and I can't do this. I knew that when I come and got you. I knew that in the beginning. First of all, God set it up where that he could find the Jew named Aquila, where Paul could find the Jew named Aquila. All relationships start with finding. All fellowship has to first start with locating someone to fellowship. I know you're looking for something very deep, dark, and spiritual. Jesus had to find his disciples before his disciples could be in fellowship with him. Right? He had to find them. They had to be located. And it just so happened that at the time that Jesus found his disciples, they were doing what they always did. Oh. He found them at the right place at the right time. Could it be that we're missing out on what God has for us because we're not finding it, because we don't step outside of this relational bickering back and forth between our fisherman buddies? See, that's what could have happened with Peter. Whenever he found Peter and John fishing, they could have been arguing about whose responsibility was to clean the net better. Or, they could have been all engrossed in what was going on with their personal little group when Jesus said, follow me. But he found them at the right time. Not only did he find them, but he came to them. St. Paul, once he found the Jew, Aquila, and he found out where they had come from and what they were about, and then met the wife, Priscilla. And he found out that they came because it was required of them. And then he goes, well, I desired to go here, but you were required to go there. How can we be friends if I'm going where I desire to go and you're going where you have to go? There has to be something mutually that is going to join together. I got to go and I get to go. What is that connecting factor? It is a love for an occupation. What did Jesus say? He said, occupy until I come. Occupy. When we are not in a place of knowing what to do or where to go or what, we should occupy. How do we occupy? Occupying is fellowship. The best way to occupy your time is being with other believers talking about the Lord. Enjoying one another and what God is doing in each other's lives. That is the mutual agreement. Let me tell you, families have broken apart because there is not a mutual agreement upon the occupational respect of fellowship among the family. If there was a love there for God the way that it should be, there ought to be fellowship, because it's back to the fundamentals of Christianity anyway. It says if you walk in the light as he is in the light, that you will have fellowship one with another, and then the blood of Jesus Christ will cleanse you from all sins. We want to come in, boy, I'm washed, I'm cleansed, I'm pure. Come up here speaking in tongues and all this sort of stuff, and you had been fighting with your spouse, fighting with your friends, fighting with your neighbors the whole way up here over spilt tea, or over he went over across the white line, or something crazy. Something crazy like that. But you have to choose to come. Don't wait till you're forced. The Bible says the powers that be are ordained of God. There's going to be some things that I say that sound forced. Don't let it force you. Just go willingly. Jesus came willingly. Paul found Aquila and Priscilla. He came unto them and then he crafted with them. It says that whenever he came, he abode with them and wrought. Why? Because they were tent makers. They were tent makers. See, we live in a day and age where it's all about people being tentative rather than attentive. See, I would have been a church preacher, but it was tentative. I had already set it in my mind at the first of the week that because of what I had planned, my presence there was going to be tentative. See, we live in a world that's based on contingencies rather than constitutions. Let's stop living our lives in tentativeness and start being attentive. Living in the moment, dealing with what's in front of you, doing things in love rather than reserves. There's a lot of openings for the reserves if anybody's interested. They're always signing up good people for the reserves. But if you will trade reserves for true love, if you will trade reserving all of this stuff and just come together occupationally, saying we are occupying ourselves in God because we need God and we fellowship because we need His presence, we need His power, we need Him to work in our lives, and we come at this thing from that angle. People need the Lord. See, the tent making was the craft. It could be any kind of craft that brings people together. But if there was any craft that the people of God ought to be involved in, it's not witchcraft, which is also, by the way, known as rebellion. And he that resisteth the powers, resisteth not the powers, but resisteth God. See, we live in a world where Christians think witchcraft is acceptable. It's not acceptable. It's a stench in the nostrils of God. Stop rebelling against the powers that be and let God be God. Let God arise and His enemies be scattered. See, stop trying to figure it out with your mind because you're not God. Get your hands off of what God has cleansed. What God has cleansed, don't you call common. Yeah, hear it. Tent makers. There were tent makers. A tent is held up by one pole in the middle. And it's attached by rings at the corners. And depending on how well those rings are sewn and put into the ground by stakes determines how long that tent is and how durable it is. The design is simple, but the intricacy has to be in the securing of the rings. Hear this, married people. If your rings are not secured, the tent that even though you built your tent and your foundation on Jesus Christ, well, we got married preacher and we love Jesus. We just love Jesus. We love the Lord. And we got the cross in the middle of our tent. It's just holding us up, bless God. But every one of them little rings are so weak and so frail and barely hanging on by one teeny tiny little thread. Why? Because you didn't take the time when you didn't have stress and you didn't have pressure to make those bands strong, to sew good material into those rings, to make them stronger, to strengthen your stakes and lengthen your cords. How do you strengthen your stakes and lengthen your cords? You got to drive the stake down further and take the string loose where that you have less wraps on the stake itself. See, when we get into a storm, instead of us driving our stakes further down into the ground, we take that string and we just start wrapping it up. I mean, wrapping it, tying it in all different kinds of configurations, navy knots and everything else. And because we don't want to do the work of driving the stakes deeper. Don't want to do the work of driving the stakes deeper. How do we drive those stakes deeper? Fellowship. One hit at a time. They wrought together. They worked together. They were tent makers. They knew what it took for a tent to be durable. They knew what it took for a tent to last. How can you sell something that doesn't last? You can't promote a product that don't last. I don't care how great you may think, how great it looks or how great it seems. You can't keep promoting because eventually the truth is going to come out. But you have to acknowledge if the tent is holding together. You can't be like, oh, that's just a worthless tent. That tent don't mean nothing. But yet the whole tent, the storm has come through, everything has come in to try to attack, and And there it stands. It's taken the wind, it's taken everything. Why? Because of fellowship. Our nation got out of fellowship with one another. We became divided, and a house divided against itself can't stand. And if we don't spend more time as Christian believers fellowshipping with each other and strengthening our rings, if we don't spend our time strengthening our rings, we're going to find that our tents are ripped and ruined. And everything that we have sheltered in that tent will be ripped and ruined as well. Paul found Aquila and Priscilla. He came unto them. He crafted with them. He abode with them. And he worked with them. Isn't this kind of what God did with us? He found us. He came to us. He crafted us. He abode with us. And now he's working with us our own salvation with fear and trembling. He's working with us. He's working, he's perfecting everything that is concerning us. And in the process of him finding us, coming to us, crafting us, abiding with us, and working in us, for no other reason but that they needed to occupy. They needed an occupation. Even though St. Paul was a great and mighty man, he could not snap his fingers or throw a hook in the water and pull out a fish with a coin in his mouth. He wasn't Jesus like that. He didn't have it like that. Say he didn't have it like that. He didn't have it like that. How many of you just feel that way? I just ain't got it like that. I see all these other people and they're doing this and they're doing that and whatever. I get so frustrated when I watch these marriage counselors on TV and whatever, and they're talking about, well, you got to do this, and me and my wife Karen, we do this, and yada yada yada. Goodness. And I'm going, dear God, if I had a table set up in my room, that table would be on my head by the time I got done. But it's because we have built our associations with each other based upon relationship rather than fellowship. We are arguing with one another on our problems and our differences rather than agreeing with one another and supporting each other in our likenesses. We have to be developed in this because it's the way we treat our relationship with our fellow man is the way we treat our relationship with God. See, to love God and love your neighbor as yourself is the greatest commandment of all. In fact, those two commandments hang all the other commandments, the law and the prophets, everything. So if you're messed up when it comes to dealing with strangers in your life, you're going to be messed up with dealing with God in your life. If you don't know how to treat people right, be them in your house, you're not going to treat God right. And stop lying to anybody else and to yourself, saying that you know God when you don't know God because you don't love your neighbor. If you don't love your neighbor, then you don't love God.